The Battle of Britain is about to begin.
We got tanks up there. Let's Battle of Erehwon, Detroit. I do not have that on the target right now. I've got a couple of these right in front of me. I'm going after it. Right, I got him.
Welcome back to the Lead Pursuit Podcast. Well, once again, we have to roam far afield. I don't know why on an aviation podcast we don't talk about aviation war games. But guess what? Other things catch our eye. We see things out there that we want to talk about, especially new projects and new miniatures coming down the way. But before all that, I have to announce a new member of the Lead Pursuit team. Steve Toth has decided that he actually has nothing to do and would like to join out and help us here on the Lead Pursuit team. Steve, welcome aboard.
Hey, thanks a lot, Doug. It'd be a fun ride, and I guess you have somebody on enough times, you just kind of make them a permanent member, huh?
Yeah, apparently you couldn't run away fast enough, so now you're part of the team. Good luck. Tonight, we're going to talk about a new game coming out from Mythico Studios and Warlord Games called Mythic Americas. Tonight, we have on Nelson Martinez, the game's creator. Nelson, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right, Doug. Thanks for having us, by the way. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, I've also got your project leader, Chris Remitz, if I can say his name correctly here. Good to have you on, Chris.
Thanks, Doug. It's great to be here. I'm excited to kind of see what the Lead Pursuit thinks about the game and what their views are here.
Well, I'll tell you, I hate it. It's terrible. I haven't even seen it. I'm not going to buy it. Oh, wait, no. Okay. Isn't that how everything goes on the internet these days, guys? It seems like everything's always negative.
That is so true.
Yeah, well, we're not going to do that. We're not going to talk any other aerial stuff tonight. We're going to go straight into talking about Mythic Americas. Why? Well, for a couple reasons. One, I do think the miniatures are really cool, and I want to dwell on that a little bit. But I also want to talk about Mythico Studios and some of the things you guys have been doing, some of the game concept for Mythic Americas and where it's going to go, because I think it's something different than what we kind of have seen in our run-of-the-mill gaming fare. But first, Nelson, let's talk a little bit about your background. How did you end up being so interested in kind of this mythic background, and especially set in Central and South American history?
So let's see. I was fortunate enough, I think, in many ways, to grow up in South America. I grew up in Venezuela, sort of, and Colombia. I came up to the States in the 70s. And I was raised by my grandmother, who was really sort of full Native American, which is kind of cool. But what was really cool about it was the kind of stuff, the stories that we all hear at home, from whatever your heritage happens to be. Well, my heritage happened to be a lot of this kind of Santeria, kind of cool sort of mythology of kind of that merges Catholicism and sort of native cultures and African cultures. So my grandma was full of stories of all kinds of cool monsters and ghosts and banshees. I think they actually made a movie out of a banshee called La Llorona, which is a famous sort of story that they tell kids to scare the crap out of them when late at night. So grew up down there and just picked up a fascination for just mythology of the Americas, really. And then when I, growing up here in New Jersey, I then picked up a love of history. I actually started by building all kinds of Tamiya airplanes of World War II, all World War II stuff. And so that modeling got me into the hobby, Warhammer Fantasy years ago. And somewhere along the line, about 10 years ago, I got this idea that, it'd be really cool to really sort of focus on the mythology of the Americas, and you can stop me, by the way, because once I get going on this, I'll just go on forever.
Keep digging your hole. No, yeah. This is great. So we'll let you keep going. Less talking by me is better.
Oh well, long story short, I love American mythology, and we have so much of it, and all of us here, gamers, most of our games are based on European mythology. And for me, I mean, that's great. Everybody loves dragons and dwarves and elves and all that other good stuff. I mean, I'm not going to knock it. I enjoy that lore and that mythology. It's all Tolkien-based in essence. But why is it that we don't really sort of focus on all of the amazing mythologies in the Americas? And when I talk about the Americas, I'm talking about North, Central, and South, and I include the Caribbean in this conversation. They're just like, I bet most of us know one billionth of a portion of what we could be really exploring just out of interest, right? So,
oh yeah, well, you and I talked about it when we kind of did a pre-interview for the show. I think this is something that hasn't been touched since Dungeons and Dragons back in the era of deities and demigods. That people really haven't gone back in and hit a lot of the less than mainstream lore that's out there. And whether you call it folklore, whether you call it religious belief, people will always get amped up and upset over whatever you choose to call it. So I will not get upset at people calling it folklore. But there's a lot of really interesting stories and beliefs there, and to be honest, kind of mythic arcs of creation through destruction and cyclical things like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think in our last conversation, I mentioned this idea that what we wanted to do with the game and the games that are being born out of this space was to give folks an itch to not only play the game, but as they play the game, to go, you know what? I didn't know that about the Incas. I didn't know that about the Maya or the Aztecs there are so many tribal nations here in North America that just most of us don't know anything about. So if we can do that, as and a lot of us are history fans as well, right? So if we could recognize that living here, for example, in North America, there are just mythologies that none of us have ever heard of that are just wild. I mean, in New Jersey, one of the mythological creatures, the Jersey Devil, that we all know as and love dearly here in New Jersey, is it harkens to a Native American creature, and so it's a very real cultural icon for us. For example, here in the Northeast, so there's a lot.
You
of stuff.
even have an F-16 squadron named them, which is so funny to me because coming from my background, we fought the Jersey Devils a number of times when they would come down and fly down in the Southeast. But
is that right? I didn't realize.
Oh
that.
yeah, absolutely. And so I had friends that knew the squadron commanders up there. And long story short, it's kind of funny to see how cultural icons get spread across everything from Air National Guard squadrons to to sports teams to everything else.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So anyway, so that's a part of it. We can get into more more detail. But honestly, for me, it's a labor of love. I started this thing 10 years ago. As a project, I've been writing a novel for 10 years, believe it or not. It's finally going to be published in the spring.
Let's talk a little bit about the progression, because what I don't know is, how does Mythico Studios fit into this whole overarching plan? How did Mythico Studios get established, and what's the goal there?
All right, so Mythico Studios started out as an experiment. So I have a background in business. I've owned my own business for, since the year 2000. So I haven't worked for the man since 2000, right? And so I'm used to kind of doing things my way, which is one of the advantages of having your own place. And in that owning business, starting businesses experience, I've been fortunate enough to aggregate a group of friends that I think are just brilliant human beings with lots of creative ideas, who also happen to be gamers. And what does my business have to do with all these gamers? Well, I've always found a place, or found a way initially, to house our gaming club, which is called the Silverbacks, in one way or another in one of our company spaces, right? And Chris, who remembers the last cool gaming club that we had at one of my offices for the Silverbacks was really posh, I think, for what we were doing. And we had dedicated gaming tables, and it was fun. So from that came this idea that, we're not playing at a hobby store for a reason. Most of our local gaming stores were, for tabletop gamers, we were like the ugly cousins, right? Like they want you to buy the stuff and then they want you to leave. It was a hassle to get a table. Nobody really dedicated space for tabletop games as far as, in the areas that we live, right? So we thought, well, what if we open a place that's more of a gaming studio, less of a store? And we build it around the notion that 2/3 of the space is going to be all for tabletop gaming. It's just really about celebrating the hobby, every aspect of the hobby. And so we started out with a small space, and we made it a membership club so that everyone, it's $5 a month, by the way. It's like almost nothing. And the idea was that everyone who joined the club, the Silverbacks Club, which then became the Mythic Studios stores, had to pay $5 a month, and for that you got gorgeous scenery, great tables, always open, always there, and it just honestly it just blew up. It
nice.
Within the first, I don't know, Chris, you remember? I mean, literally within months, we just could not fit people in the place.
Oh yeah, it was 2 months. I mean, we were in the new place in November, and by January we expanded. I mean,
that's a good problem to have.
It was that fast, and I can remember. I still have fond memories of going into the smaller space when we had one of our big tournaments, and the place was just packed, solid, wall to wall, and it was amazing to see the community just come out of the woodwork. Essentially, I mean, everyone knows some gamers, if you're into the hobby, but to just see the sheer volume of people, young and old too. That's a thing. It was a lot of young people doing it.
So that's what's fascinating, because everybody, I shouldn't say everybody, a lot of people that run game stores and kind of watch the industry for me tell me how hard it is to get all ages and groups in for tabletop gaming, but it's easy if you have a mix of different genres. And so it's curious to me that you guys have maybe not had to do that you've been able to kind of drag larger composite groups in, and not cater to such a broad spectrum as card games, as comic books, and modeling, all the different things that a lot of times people do in kind of what I'll call a compromise store, where they do a lot of everything and not really anything well.
Yeah, well, if you do you remember that Kevin Costner movie, the baseball one, where he builds a baseball field and
exactly.
On his corn, on his farm. The idea of if you build it, they will come, right? So I've always had this notion of, and Chris shares this with me, and we've always thought that there's a lot of, I call them the lost tribes. Okay, so there are groups of people out there that are Blood Red Skies players, they're Bolt Action players, or Warhammer 40K, they're whatever, you pick the gaming system, right? But there's no place that caters to all of them. So how do you aggregate and create a community of people who are not necessarily playing the same games, right? So first you start with this notion of, okay, well, you got to give a space that's dedicated for our games. It's, we do have card players who come play Magic, and all that stuff. But usually those guys take precedent over everyone else, right? Because it's the easiest thing for a hobby store to run, just put some folding tables.
It takes very little overhead, no terrain, nothing like that.
Totally, and it's crack. The players buy cons. I mean, it's just
exactly
right. So it's easy money. It makes sense. I don't knock it. It's much more work to offer tabletops. 20 permanent tables. It's very difficult for anybody. So we started from that premise. Okay, you know what? Lost tribes, all these folks, they're looking for a community. What we need to do is build a community, give them a beautiful home, and then, there's going to be an attachment to this, which is going to be a small hobby store, right? And that's going to help support the club. And we call them studios instead of stores, and all of a sudden, we're now opening our second one. We plan to have 4 by the end of 2021. The second one is opening in November. This is all even through COVID. And I got to tell you, the one thing about making sure that you build a community first and you make it about them, not about the business. And that's where I think it's really important. Like, you got to make it about. For us, coming to a studio, a Mythico studio, is like going to your favorite bar. It's like you come in, there's going to be a table, everyone is there, is going to make sure the scenery is awesome. You never want for scenery at our place. Trust me. We literally have a location dedicated.
Another terrible problem to have.
Oh, it's awful, dude. It's nothing worse than you show up to play whatever game you're playing and the scenery is falling apart. It looks like crap. It kills the cinematic experience. So anyway, so we spent a lot of time and effort. Chris has been huge. He's the Silverbacks leader. The Silverback group is a good, solid group of gamers. We play everything, and so it's taken off, and it's all community supported. So that's the background in as far as how Mythico Studios became is growing into what it's growing to be, which is really an entertainment company, is how we describe it.
So in the middle of all that, you say, "Oh, what the heck? Let me just rewrite another game and change the concept and bring out some new miniatures and start a multi-year project," right?
Yeah. Well. So this is where my business background comes from, right? So when you've owned your own business for good Lord, what is this, 20 years now, almost 21 years, there's a couple of things that you learn along the way. I've had businesses where I've had investors, and so you have responsibility to investors, right? So I see our community leaders as sort of quote our stockholders, our investors, right? We're not that big a company, but the idea is that you're responsible to them. You have to offer. You always have to have something that's structured for them, and that requires that you have a plan. So when we launched Mythicos, we launched it with a very clear business plan. It was a 5-year business plan, and the plan was to create an American-based entertainment company that focuses and starts from the tabletop gaming industry. A lot of entertainment companies, a lot of brands that are in the entertainment business have started from video games, right? So you can name dozens of them. Or they've started from comic books, right? Some of the biggest entertainment companies in the world, their brands started out as comic books, back in the 50s, okay? So can we start an entertainment company from the tabletop and build the IP and the ideas from the games that we come up with? And so the idea was Mythico Studios as an entertainment company. The studios are kind of the community places where we test the games. We have the community involvement in writing the games. Chris will attest to this. All of the writers of our game are Silverbacks, right, Chris?
Yes, they were. They were all friends, and that's I think part of what made it successful is that you can get a group of friends together. They're all creative. I mean, I usually find most people who are into the hobby are creative folk, and to take these ideas of these myths of the Americas, right? To talk about Aztecs and Maya and Inca, which are these mysterious to me. I grew up in Pennsylvania. These are almost fantastical cultures in and of themselves, and when you start diving in, as well as North American, Indigenous Americans, which I've always been fascinated in, but you get this concept that we want to make a game around that, and then you are gifted with the Warlords of Erehwon rule set, and then you get a bunch of friends together, and we're like, okay, guys, now how do we synthesize this? We can just make models for Warlords of Erehwon, and that's great, but wouldn't it be more fun to try and personalize the game to make it more thematic to the actual Mythic Americas ideas than the fluff behind that? The team really rallied to it. I mean, they all, we've been working on it, I guess, since about a year and a half.
Yeah.
And I'm so proud of, everyone involved that in a year and a half, we are releasing, pretty much a full model line, a whole rule set, and it really is that Warlords of Erehwon version 2. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Warlords of Erehwon or that gaming system, Doug or Steve, but it's it's a unique experience. I mean, have you played at all?
I haven't played. I've got a PDF of the rules because I was going to get into it and then got sidetracked. but on PDF day, I bought plenty of copies of rules like that and Gates of Antares as well. So
Sure.
I'm vaguely familiar with it.
Yeah, I'm actually just kind of really enjoying here just the explaining of it. And it's funny because you keep using the word myth and the myths of the Americas and stuff like that. And just thinking about when you hear stuff, when you hear the term myth or mythology, like as a person who grew up in America, right, you automatically go to Greek mythology, or you go to like some of like the, Asian cultures and their myths and their mythology, right? But to hear the stories of Native Americans in Central America, that's stuff that you hear growing up in school as in history class learning about. And even their folklore and stuff, you don't hear it described as myths. So it's just really neat to see kind of this fusion of the myth with some of the cultures that you're familiar with. So it's just a neat introduction to that stuff.
Yeah, it's so the mythology is, you're so right? Because we grow up in school and we learn the classics, right? Greek mythology, the foundation of all Western civilization, right? And then recently it's been Northern European mythology is kind of the driver of all of our myths, certainly for the gaming industry. But when you think about our own American cultures, the cultures that are from the top of the North America to the very, very bottom down to Tierra del Fuego, it's incredible what's here. Just even if what we do with this game is to get folks to learn more about our own history, and by that I mean the cultures and the people that are in this continent, I think we would have succeeded. And I would love for people to get familiar with what the Aztecs were, what the Maya, the Incas, the Olmecs, the Toltecs, all of these various cultures, the various tribes. Most people don't even know the number of North American tribal nations that are out here. Most people don't even know that every time we walk down the street, we're walking on a place that's been part of a group of human beings that were living here way before any of us, right? And that have had culture for thousands of years. So it's here, like in Europe. I go to England all the time, before COVID, because I love it over there. And it's incredible. You're right. You can go to a bar and sit at a bar that literally could be 900 years old. And they're conscious of their history. We're less so here, but it's here. It's not just our own kind of Western-based history.
Well, that was the funny part that we talked about, Nelson, because I guess a lot of times I don't realize how blessed I was to grow up with a very small, very tiny amount of Cherokee culture in my family, and then having my mom and her family that, while they were pretty much German and Welsh and not the slightest bit of native indigenous people, but they lived in New Mexico, and so her and my dad met out there. And so I grew up in this world where I was given Navajo tales and storybooks as a child, and I had Kachina dolls on the shelves, and so to me it's kind of funny because I go, oh yeah, no big deal. You mean not everybody grew up hearing these stories and these legends and things? So I think you've hit on something, that there's a lot of Americans who are interested in it and are fascinated with it, but I think a lot of people probably never put it into their games or never incorporate it, especially as a separate game, because they didn't know where to start. It's kind of overwhelming.
I'm excited, and I hope I don't get this wrong now, because I'm going to be really embarrassed if my memory's starting to fade me. But I was looking at the figures for this game, and when I was in grade school, I remember learning about the Aztecs. I think it was the Aztecs, and I had to do like a diorama project. And I did this diorama of a spinning pole with like little guys hanging off with their feet, and painted all the feathers up with the colors. So I saw some of those Aztec figures, and I was like, man, it's going to be cool to paint some of those guys. So is that an Aztec thing, or do I have the cultures mixed up there?
It depends on what that actually might have been a Northwest, Native American scene that you're describing. Depends on, there's a lot of that. The Maya had a similar thing that was part of their one of their rituals. It depends. I'm not. You'd have to sort of fill me in a little bit more on what the kind of the diorama was about. But I can tell you this though: if you just after this conversation, just out of curiosity, go look up some of the mythologies around the warrior culture of the Aztecs, and find out how, in some of their stories, if you're an amazing warrior, you basically fight your way and you die and you go to hell and you continue to fight down there and you fight all these awesome demons and creatures and it's just like this amazing adventure that you have as a warrior, right? Their mythologies, were alive every single day. Now, for them, this is important. For them, a lot of these creatures and characters and entities were religious figures, right? They had religious significance, right? Now, so, for us as a group of people who are very sensitive to wanting to make sure that what we do is we encourage people to learn about these cultures, is we want people to celebrate the cultures, learn about them, because there's so much to learn. And we think that by giving people that type of information in a fun, engaging, maybe even entertaining way, you're more likely to want to learn about it than if I just sat here and gave you, a 2-hour podcast on the history of the Aztecs.
So let's talk a little bit about what you've done to tweak it, because this isn't just Aztecs and Incas for pike and shot. This isn't just, we're not just taking some very historical things and rolling them out with rules and making, in a sense, a counterbalance to the samurai in Warlords of Erehwon. It's now, no kidding, something, as you said, Mythic Americas, there's a different layer of lore than even what you're used to, even if you've studied these things. And tell us a little bit about your concepts, ever living versus ever changing, and how you've built that into the concepts of the rules.
So when you do something like this, I think, in my opinion, one of the things you have to do is be cognizant of the places you don't want to go to. So you don't want to go to places where there may be an active religious group, even entire nations, who worship certain entities or certain ways of, or certain beliefs and that kind of stuff, right? So you want to be able to be very sensitive to that. As 40% Native American, we were you and I were joking about how many Elizabeth Warrens are in my
exactly. I think I'm 512 Warrens in mine, which means I'm not even enough Native American to be counted.
I may be like 13,000 out of 100,000.
I think you're actually like 1 million Warrens or something.
But I think the reality is, if you sort of have that it's got to be a driving principle, right? So the respect for the cultures is got to be a driving principle. My job as a sort of creative person within this was, how do I create a place where I can bring in these mythologies and marry them to this history of these incredible cultures and present them in a way that allows for us as a group of people to not tread into unwanted territory, but to be able to put in front of you a host of incredible histories and mythologies, right? And just keep it to that. Keep it to giving you that itch, right? So we felt that the way to do that was to create a theater, in essence, where we can put these characters to full play, and to give that theater a theme. And so we created our own mythos for Mythic Americas, and it's based on a universal theme that it's not only universal to a lot of these cultures in the Americas, but really universal to a lot of cultures around the world. This notion of balance, right? So this idea of balance in your existence and how you live your life, and balance between mankind and nature and the universe, yin and yang, that whole thing, right? It's a very universal theme when it comes to just the philosophy of living, right? So you got to keep that big heady thought in your head as kind of the one of the creative foundations. And then you create you need to be able to put, that balance gives you a mechanism. And forgive me if this gets a little heady, but that balance gives you a mechanism to be able to create two opposing forces. Because whenever you want to play a tabletop game or you want to create a cool story, you got to have tension, right? You got to have characters that are pushing against each other, Otherwise, it becomes, I don't even know what story doesn't have two sides to it. So you got to have balance for the story is key component. And then you have two sides that are struggling to achieve a goal. Now, in our stories, the balance is dictated by this entity we call the One, right? And the One gives all of us, we humans are called the children, right? And the children are created by the One, and we are giving something called the Way. The Way is kind of the way to live, right? But it encompasses a lot of stuff. You'll have to read some of the fluff as the lore comes out. But those three principles give you the tools to then manage two opposing groups, the ever-living and the ever-changing. And so if you look at life in general here on Earth, you have constant chaotic forces that drive change and innovation within life, right? And so natural disasters are things that do that. Tectonic movement of the Earth, of the plates of the Earth does that. Big storms.
That never happens in South and Central America.
Right, the Andes being built by those things.
Exactly.
Right? So those kind of things are the ever-changing forces, right? That's those are the things that bring evolution to the fore. And so the ever-living really are the entities that are focused on life as we know it. We, the children, humanity, are the latest iteration of what the One calls the ruling children, right? So our job is we're put here to kind of keep the balance in the beginning, and we in the Mythic Americas we live in eras, the way the Aztecs live in eras. And in our story, in this game, this portion of the game, we are at the end of an era, right? And guess what? The children. The ruling children are always the one that somehow managed to screw up the balance. And that's as the one.
Shocking.
Right. So we're here to maintain it, but eventually
we're going to tip it. We're going to screw it up.
Exactly. And that's as the One had desired it. But, it still seems to be a mystery to the children that this happens, at the end of every era. And so that allows us to now create, and this is important, and Chris will can add to this, but once you've created these components, you have your cooking ingredients. Now you have to put a certain amount of rules to this, right? So one of the rules that I put on this, again, because of my sensitivity to, and of our sensitivity as a group, to making sure that we stay respectful to the cultures and, the mythologies and the history of these incredible peoples, was that in our game, there are two universal factors. There is no evil group in our game. There's no dark side and light side. There's no people who are just outright evil. All children can be evil as humans, right? All children can do good things. In our game, we represent that by the desire to have, to achieve balance or disrupt balance. For whatever reason, you're looking to disrupt that balance or to keep that balance, right? So that gives you the ability to have an entire faction like the Aztecs who run around with a bunch of, undead bound creatures. Well, in our culture, in the Western culture, zombies are, denote evil of some sort, right?
There's little old church ladies freaking out right now as they listen to this podcast. Oh, wait, no, they don't listen to our podcast.
We're safe. We're safe.
Because they don't like my foul language.
So with all of this, the best thing about it is when you sit here and you write, and look, as I work through this novel, which for me, again, it's been a labor of love for 10 years. I'm going to be flabbergasted when I actually see it come out, arrive on my doorstep. There's an enormous amount of freedom. Here's what I can tell you, though. Because we then bring in the players to play in this play, as it were, and they are characters and cultures and even creatures that are familiar to us as Americans, because everybody knows a Mohawk warrior. Everybody has heard of a Seneca archer. Everyone has heard of an Inca or an Aztec or a Maya. We might not have heard of all of the cool things that they're doing or some of the characters that are a part of their mythology, but we do have a surface understanding, a layer understanding of who these peoples are. So you bring those characters in, and now you give this to a group of game designers who are all very smart, folks with masters, very educated, super creative people. And all of a sudden they start coming up with their own ideas. And that's when you know you're onto something. Because, oh shit, when I was a kid, excuse the French, I used to do this.
Yeah,
and I
we
remember
don't give a fuck on this podcast.
So, you see the juices flowing, they get all excited, and they take on this new personality because now they discover there's all kinds of amazing stuff that we have right here. All we need to do is stop looking to Europe for and look, I have no issues with dragons and dwarves and elves and all that shit. But man, we have so many more cooler things here.
And let's talk about that though, because that's something that I think. I'll be honest, I don't know that the current larger gaming world in the United States is really ready for. And this is kind of why I wanted to have this as one of our podcast episodes, because we've tried to have a series of discussions, whether we're talking about World War II gaming, Weird War kind of 1947-48 gaming here with Mythic Americas. This problem that we have been so hung up a lot of times when we play games in playing it as the right or the wrong, the good or the bad. Somebody has to, quote, play the bad guy, that I think it's hard for people to step back and say, okay, I'm going to look at this, even though it has elements taken from history and from legend and all kind of mashed up together, that it's not an intent to draw a line of good versus evil, right versus wrong, conqueror versus conquered, because the way you've described the system to me when we've talked about it is it's building up a tension with objectives, secondary objectives, and things that don't necessarily fit the way you view possibly that those forces would work, those historical forces would work, and that all the mythic stuff rolled into it caused you to think, well, I now have to build an army that's different than if I grabbed something out of 1500s history. Right.
So if you exactly right. So if you'd remove the evil side against the good side, right, and you just go on the very basic concept that people fight all the time for all kinds of reasons, and we can't explain to you why that one started that war with that group, except that in our lore, right, since there is no good or evil per se, there is love and hate, but there is no good or evil. There's no good side, no bad side. We've set it up so that we've taken, and maybe this is a good time, and I'll bring in Chris on this, but the lore of balance, the idea of balance, we then took that concept and brought it to Warlords of Erehwon, right? Because what Rick Priestley did with Warlords of Erehwon was to create an amazing, generic is the wrong term, but it is designed to be a generic gaming system that allows you to play with whatever models you have at home, right? So he spent a lot of time writing an awesome core, non-fluff, dependent, generic rule system that you can just use, like I said, to play a fantasy game, right? Very good rules, well thought out, where we thought we can put two things that we felt the game needed, and I think a lot of the community of Erehwon wanted, was one, they did want a background. They wanted a fluff. They wanted a history. They wanted something to attach themselves and be passionate about and read about and find out about. So we thought, well, Mythic Americas is great, and for that will deliver in spades. And then the other thing is, if balance is your motivator, the scenarios that are in the game right now, not that they're bad, are still in a way designed to be more about victory points, how many points you can kill, right? And that can lead to a lot of complaints about, well, the dwarves are so hard to kill. It's everybody plays dwarves because they're. Well,
you end up with a lot of last man standing kind of games.
Exactly,
and I think we've all said that's not what we want out of this gaming experience, and we want something different.
And
that's one spot where Blood Red Skies really shines, right? Because it has that boom chip mechanic that isn't about fight to the death, right?
Right.
Fight for the mission, fight for an objective, but you don't have to always annihilate the opposing force to nothing. And quite frankly, that's very rarely how any type of fight or battle, except my first marriage. That one ended in total annihilation. But
well, hey, at least we know our limits.
most fights in life don't end to at annihilation. So it's cool to see that working into some other game systems.
Well, if you've played Warlords of Erehwon, you know that annihilation is exactly what happens when units meet. It is a very, very bloody tabletop game, and it's rare that a unit will come out of a confrontation unscathed and able to survive a second. And so it is bloody, and that makes the idea of playing for kill points seem like an obvious objective. But we wanted more. We wanted a game where you could, lose your entire force but still win on points. That's a hard thing to put together. But we've seen other games. I mean, we're all very experienced and exposed to pretty much every game that's out there, and you know the ones that can do that. And so we were striving really to try and replicate something similar. And the interesting thing is that it also it supports the theme, that we can start weaving that ever-living and ever-changing and balance onto Mythic Americas in the form of those objectives. And so when you're playing a game, you have a primary objective that you and your opponent both are very clearly aware of, but then you have secret secondary objectives, which adds that stealth strategy behind it, and also goes into the whole army building aspect of it. So there's a lot of ways that we try and build that kind of layering on top of what Rick Priestley wrote to create that Mythic Americas experience, which is different than Warlords of Erehwon.
And it's driven from the idea of balance, right? So what Chris is mentioning, so if you think about it, one of the things that we wanted to do for the game was that we wanted to almost force you to build a balanced list. Because in this game, before you even start the game, you don't know under which alignment you're going to be fighting, right? So you can't always decide that I'm only ever going to play Ever Living because they have awesome whatever, right? You show up to the tabletop with your, Tribal Nations warband, and I'm gonna fight against Chris's Aztecs, for example. I need to be prepared because it's a random choice before the game starts as to whether I'm going to be ever living or I'm going to be ever changing. Now, why is that important? Well, already adds an element of a random chance to this, which and you'll notice a theme here. We want to add a lot of controlled random elements to the game in order to encourage folks to be prepared for a variety of conditions within scenarios, right? And it starts from how you build your list. So you have to be prepared by showing up with a list that is maybe playing on the ever-living or ever-changing conditions. By playing under one of those, you're going to have access to special things that are only available under those alignments, right? So that right there starts putting a path in front of you as to what you may have to consider when you build the list. Then there's a primary scenario. And then, as Chris mentioned, there's a number of secondary scenarios. These are all objective-driven scenarios. So you could literally play the game. Well, you have to literally play the game the entire time you're playing. You have to keep those scenarios in mind. So you're gonna find troops that are completely, it's totally okay to send your warlord out to get his face smashed in and for him to die with his bodyguards and everything, because you don't care. At the end of the day, you're positioning to have that other unit to come in and hold that objective at the key moment to win the game. So for me, having played chess for 25 years, the idea of always looking 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 moves ahead in order to set up a position that's more advantageous to me, that's the beauty of an awesome game. Actually, that's the beauty of what Rick Priestley did with Warhammer Fantasy way back in the beginning of time, right? Where you had to play it that way in a more historical tabletop gaming experience. And so the way the guys have written the mechanics for the scenarios, the way this sort of attaches itself to the mechanics of the fluff of the game is really what I love about what happened to Mythic Americas. Because now when you show up, and remember, we built, this goes back to the gaming studio. We built a gaming studio in a series of stores, as it were, so that you were always immersed in the cinematic world that you play your games in. So if you're going to show up to play Blood Red Skies, we want to make sure that that you're feeling like that environment is come to life for you. All right. So this game should do the same, and the scenarios should do the same, and they should really marry themselves to the fluff. And I think the guys have done a brilliant job of taking the foundational rules that Rick Priestley wrote, and then adding this layer, which I think delivers on the idea of balance, which at the end of the day is the entire underpinning of what Mythic Americas is all about. So
I was about to say, don't give Steve too many ideas here. He's going to show up at your store wearing a flight suit and a leather flying cap and say, "I want to be immersed in blood red skies."
Oh, you know what? It's to me, dude. Why else do I mean? We love history. We love the planes. We love the things. We love the ships. We love the whatever. Aside from community, which it's like going to your local bar, right? That's what a gaming club is.
That's what our Gathering of Eagles was. It was a bar that had a gaming problem.
That's freaking fantastic. That's
what we did for a weekend.
Yeah, don't forget, you're talking to a guy that wore a flight helmet with a full oxygen mask and hose when COVID broke out to go to Home Depot. So I might have to actually take you up on that.
Don't threaten things you can't do. Well, let's talk a little bit about kind of where the fluff is right now and kind of where it's expanding to, because what we've seen teased online and put out between your website, Warlords website, we know certain armies and war bands are out there. We know there's going to be Aztecs. We know there's going to be tribal nations. We know there's eventually going to be Inca. I think there's also going to be Maya, from what everyone says, and I'm really curious to see how we draw some of the lines between those and make them unique. But where is it kind of going to evolve and go after some of these native cultures?
So one of the driving principles for Mythic Americas was that we wanted to make sure that we designed a game and worked on a game that was going to be supported, right? Like I as a gamer have fallen for a lot of games in the past where you love the game and then suddenly a year later there's no new miniatures, there's no new rules, there's no new campaigns for a variety of reasons, right? It's one of the reasons why we partner with Warlord. John Stollard has founded this company, has an awesome history of being in the industry, creating great games, supporting great games, right? So our partnership with Warlord gives us the ability to produce these games and get these games out to the world, knowing that we as a group of individuals, for whatever reason, call us crazy, have invested an enormous amount of time, money, and effort into creating a game that we feel is going to be here for 10 years plus, right? And so how some of these things are driven by the simple notion that if we know Mythic Americas is going to be around for a long time, we know it for two reasons. One is because Mythic Americas will have 8 factions, right? Which will be the core factions. Chris is going to start texting me not to give away too much of what the other 4 factions are going to be, but there are going to be there's an additional Southern South America factions. There's a Caribbean war band. There's another whole series of North American war bands. There's one more technology-driven, an additional South American war band. And so those are going to be laid out in the following schedule. So come January, the Incas and the Maya will hit thereabouts. And then in the summer, we have 2 more factions, 2 more warband factions coming in. And then we have the last 2 right around the fall. Now, the reason we're doing this is because remember we mentioned balance as kind of a universal theme. So the other driving principle to this concept is, as much as I love the Americas and as much as I'm passionate about this world, the idea of balance and these 2 forces has given us the scope to come up with what we call the Mythic series, the Mythic Earth series. And Mythic Earth means that we're going to, in fall of 2021, we're going to introduce Mythic Asia. And Mythic Asia is really Mythic Americas on that continent. And for us, we want to touch on themes of cultures and histories and mythologies that are little explored, that aren't your cliche, we've seen it 1,000 times. No, we want to look at cultures that are little known, and then we move on to Mythic Europe. And again, the same idea, and then Mythic Africa, and then we end with a fifth book called Mythic Earth, which is the sort of the big kahuna that wraps up the idea of balance across the children, which is all of humanity, not just us, the children here in the Western Hemisphere. And so it's a big project. I mean, it's a massive project with a lot of factions, 6 to 8 factions per universe, as it were. And it's I think a testament to the genius of Rick Priestley that he wrote a platform. Gave us. We inherited, and this book now is our version of that. We inherited a good, solid foundation from which to build this sort of mythic concept, and so that's where it's going to go. So next year is all about Mythic Americas, and it will continue to be all about Mythic Americas because it's not going anywhere. It's going to get new factions. The 8 core factions will get new subgroups within each as we design. And actually, one of the things that we're going to be doing is, so take a model like the Quetzalcoatl, right? So the Quetzalcoatl was alive and apparent in a lot of the cultures in Central America. A Quetzalcoatl might look different to a Maya than it would look to an Aztec, right? So my goal is, well, hell, next year we should have kind of a Maya version of Quetzalcoatl. What would that look like, right? I mean, we have the Aztec version of the Quetzalcoatl right now. And so there's no reason why once you design a miniature, you can come up with adaptations. Certainly with today's technology and the sculptors that we work with, we can do this, and we have the ability to produce variations on some of these models. And so there's going to be a rich model environment for us, a wealth of targets, as it were, for us to pick and choose from. And then over the next 5 years, as we launch these mythic universes around Mythic Earth, we're going to find out all kinds of cool histories about all kinds of cultures around the planet that most of us have never heard of.
Well,
so that's the overall goal.
So I put my first ultimatum out when we did our pre-interview,
Mm-hmm.
and I said if there aren't war llamas, then I'll never speak to you again. And we talked about that and some things you may or may not want to talk about. And then since we're going to talk about Mythic Asia, I'll put it out there. If I don't have Maori warriors with spirit Tasmanian devils that are the size of one of the Sasquatches, then I'm still not talking to you.
Now, Doug, you see that you brought that up in our last conversation, and dude, I got to tell you, I went to look for them. I went to research that because that's not something that I was familiar with. And to me, you did what I said we should all be doing. You gave me an itch and not a rash. You gave me an itch, and I went to look for something that was interesting, new, and different. And that's what a lot of us want on the tabletop. Something fresh. Something that, as a history fan, I feel like I'm learning something. But it's certainly about a culture that I knew very little about on a side of the planet that I'm not familiar with. I think about New Zealand, and now all I think about New Zealand is I think of freaking, Wedo Workshop and The Hobbit, the Shire being in New Zealand.
And this is one of the problems that we have with our very Tolkien-esque fantasy is I can't tell you how many fantasy games of a million different rules I've seen with an army of goblins and some trolls bolted onto them and maybe a dragon fighting a bunch of people in plate mail that might have some elves or dwarves mixed in. Mm-hmm. And, miniatures will always look beautiful. People always make some neat armies, have some cool tactics. But to me, there's just so much mythos that is underserved that I think would really be awesome to be able to put on the tabletop if there were a game and a system to really expand it, which I think a lot of us liked when we first saw with Warlords of Erehwon and things like the Tengu were in there. And so there's all these little known things that we're like, hey, that's actually kind of cool that you can do.
And I think the learning new stuff is always something that drives people towards historical games and not just another sci-fi fantasy game, right? So I know even for me, like I had always been into aviation, growing up in America, always loved the P-51, loved the Corsair, loved the Hellcat, loved the P-40, right? And then I was in Blood Red Skies for about a month, and I was like, Spitfire, and everybody across the pond was, oh, no, it's not a Spitfire. There's 67 different marks of Spitfires, and don't ever confuse them. And sent me down that whole rabbit hole of learning about the different marks of the Spitfires. And then so that to me personally, I think is what draws people to historical gaming, right? Is you find these things out that you didn't know about, and you kind of go down that rabbit hole. And I think people in general that are into historical gaming have that desire to learn those new things.
Well, I was going to say that's a question I want to ask Chris, is how much time as the project lead is buying you and your team some more space with Nelson to go, hey, hold on a minute, we need to go research this because here's some cool things, or we think we have a rule, we just have to find the right mythic creature, entity, folklore to fit that. How does that work out for you?
Well, it definitely is not that direction. It's always the what are the myths, right? What can we find out that's hidden under the covers of the tribal nations or the Aztecs? And when you start, you come up with something like a Wendigo or the Quetzalcoatl, and those are standard, right? But it does start getting down deeper into the weeds, like we have like the Maris monstrosity, which is for the Incas. Or Camazotz, which is actually a fairly well-known mythic monster for the Maya. The whole team just gets a real kick out of doing their research, but trying to find the coolest monster. I mean, that's really kind of what it comes down to, because you're looking for what's the one thing that pushes it over the edge, that no one's heard of, that's going to be a completely new idea that we can run with, and then we'll bring it in and we'll say, okay, we're building a giant snake, or we're building a giant monster full of dead bodies. What do we do to make it thematic to the faction, right? How does it work so that it's holding up? Because each faction does have a play style. That was one of the things that kind of was my job. I unleash these guys, asking your friends, they're creative. You say, okay, go ahead, put together a Mayan army. Tell me what you would do if it were Mayans, and how would you make it special? But I didn't take any army myself. I mean, I let everyone work them, and then I tried to make sure that the ideas of theme and play style were stuck to, so that every army didn't play the same. But we do that with the monsters. You'll take a monster and you say, okay, we know that, Aztecs are playing kind of like a horde army. What would be a fun thing to do? And all right, now we've got it. Now we create some rules that are going to make the monster stand out and play differently than anything, even in the whole Warlords of Erehwon.
That's where I think there's both some really cool artistic license, and there's always a pitfall, because as I look at some of the miniatures or some of the monsters, and I have an expectation from my knowledge of some of the stories and the folklore for how things are. It's like 5 minutes ago, I just finally looked at the Quetzalcoatl. I'm like, who the fuck put legs on a Quetzalcoatl?
That's right. We did.
That's right. We did.
You assholes did. So it's funny. It's things like that, and it's like Nelson and I having the argument about pumas versus black jaguars versus all these other things, and those kind of discussions. And then I think it's going to be interesting because hopefully people will not be quote unquote rivet counters, because the intent is not to create something straight out of history. It's to take some of these interpretations, and people are going to have to say, hey, you guys as game designers took your own spin on it. That might not have been how I modeled one of them, but I get what the theme of that monster is.
What are you going to do?
I know why it's supposed to be that way.
You're going to come and tell me that the Quetzalcoatl didn't have legs?
Hey, I've got one, and it didn't have legs, mister.
Yeah, okay.
It's in my basement. It's my pet.
I want to see pictures.
No, and look, I challenge folks to go look up a Boraro, right, which is one of the that should give you a hint as to what we're going to be doing as one of the next factions. But if you look up a Boraro, which is a Tucano creature, you're going to be blown away by the sickness of this creature, right? On the tabletop, that thing is going to be amazing. If you look at an Ayar, you're not going to find one. You're not going to find an Ayar in an Aztec temple wall, right? Because an Ayar is a creation of Mythic Americas, based on
that was one I'm like, where the hell did that one come from?
Yeah.
But no, that's totally within y'all's license to do that.
That's exactly right. So if you then, and so people are going, well, why in the hell would you create a creature that, there's so many, you just said there are all these cool, that's right. But it's still a game, right? So we still have to create miniatures that will do some of the things that the game rules ask you to do, like, shoot overhead. And so instead of trying to force something that maybe can do something like that or may feel not natural to the mythology of that particular creature, we decided to, in some instances, we're going to have full creative license, and we're going to create our own monstrosities based on the lore that we created for that particular faction within Mythic Americas. So
I'm already disturbed because I'm just doing my internet research, and the Boraro, in the belief of the Turco Indians of the Upper Amazon, tall with hairy chests and huge phalluses. Now maybe I don't want to know who your modelers are.
Yeah, how do you model that on there, huh?
There you go, Steve. You always wanted to be a company 3D modeler. There you go.
Yeah, I'll get on that right away. I'll start really doing some great research.
No,
Sure.
so yeah, exactly. So I know you guys are going to take some artistic license, and that's cool. I think it's just funny that for me, enjoying so much of this, so much of the folklore, I sit there and I'll dig through, and there'll be interesting little details that are there because obviously you're modeling a lot after the known art styles and graphic imagery of these tribes and of these cultures. So I think it'll be fascinating to see how that evolves over time with each one of the different armies.
definitely, and you'll see, for when it came to the human troops, right, as it were, the human-sized warriors, we tried to be very, very careful in how much time we wanted to spend. A lot of time in researching the particular units, so that they were as historically accurate as we could. So if you want to use one of our Seneca archers for some other game, or we wanted to make sure that we were truly representing, to the best of our abilities, what a North American, tribal nations archer may look like, in the 1400s, right? So, when it came to the human units, we spent a lot of time researching those. When it came to the mythological creatures, I say, yeah, okay, show me a Quetzalcoatl and I'll tell you it doesn't have legs, or it does have legs, and maybe the next one doesn't have legs, but it has, 4 sets of wings. I don't know, because, we have descriptions from the Aztecs as to, these gods. But unlike the Egyptians, they didn't go around building entire statues of what, the god of the undead.
It's not like a sphinx. Like. Yeah, exactly. It's not Anubis standing out there in fine detail.
Exactly. So it's up to us, to bring these things to life. And I'm telling you, dude, I promise you, there's going to be all kinds of folks out there. As soon as, and I've seen it already. I can't tell you how many requests we had for, oh my God, you have to do the Inuit. Oh my God, you have to do this. You got to, what do you mean you're not doing? We've had requests for Vikings. The Vikings got to North America. You should do the Vikings. And so that's when you know that you're going to have fun for the next few years, because people have all kinds of ideas. Will there
you've hit the end of the internet when your search for Quetzalcoatl brings up the article, was Quetzalcoatl a Viking? I think I have hit the end of the internet with that one. I'm like, no, let's stop mixing my mythologies there.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be, we're going to run into, like you call them, rivet counters. I used to build 32nd scale World War II planes, and I used to go to competitions, and I stopped going to competitions because I hated that freaking mirror that that you have to put your plane on so that they can look at the underside of the plane, and then they would nail you if it was the wrong machine gun size or the wrong cannon size or whatever the hell it was. And I was just like, what, that killed the fun for me. Now, I love researching that, and I love working on that, but I didn't want to take it to that extent on my own modeling experience, and it sort of killed it for me. But I can't tell you how many books on planes I have here, on my library shelf. So I love those details, but some of these things you sort of got to take lots of creative license on, like a Quetzalcoatl. I have no idea, what does a Sasquatch really look like, other than a sort of bad picture from the 70s.
Exactly. And I'm sure there's also a lot of back and forth between you and the miniatures designers, and from everything that we've talked about, it seems like you also want to give them a little bit of artistic license. So you don't want to give them this precise, sketch of exactly what you want. You want them to be artistic because they're going to really induce the feeling of motion and life and even terror in some of these monstrosities and these creations you have. Because otherwise, if you're just taking a pencil sketch and turning it into a miniature, it might look like bolt action miniatures. Oh wait,
so I gotta ask. I gotta ask. We have some ancient aliens, sky people, crystal skull factions coming to this game in the future. Or?
So funny you mentioned that, right? So we did mention some technology factions, and all I would say is I'm sure everybody's familiar with the the Nazca lines. In the Andes, in the highlands of the Andes, in Peru and in Chile, and so there's all kinds of. If you look, I'll give you another homework assignment. So go look for the aircraft of the within the pre-Columbian cultures in specifically the highlands of the Andes in Colombia, and you'll see. Which I love this. I love the fact that when you get into the South American mythologies and the ancient cultures, there's this incredible fascination by archaeologists today and popular culture with connecting them to alien visitation. And the Nazca are a classic example of that. That the lines that could only, according to scientists, have been painted by. Could have been drawn by looking from above, from a high altitude above the plains, and so long answer to that. But a technology-driven faction is definitely is going to be one of the 8, which I think is going to lead for.
That's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, it's going to be a blast. So, it's 120 models that I think we just spent. I don't know, Chris, how long have we, a year or something doing this?
Oh yeah, a year and a half. Yep.
And so we've had the pleasure of designing all these gribbly creatures and cool warriors, and look forward to to designing a bunch more. And I got to tell you, the Warlord guys, John Sollard and Simon Tiff, before he left Warlord, was a sort of visionary with this. Chris and Paul Sawyer, everybody who's, Gabriel, everybody who's worked with us on this from the Warlord side of things has just been freaking phenomenal. So it's a big kudos to them as well, because, we might have come up with the idea, but they've been phenomenal partners in making this thing happen.
Absolutely. Well, we've been talking for a little over an hour, and while I can talk about mythology and folklore, and especially Central American and South American kind of stories, I can talk about that for hours. I think our listeners probably want us to wrap it up, and my excuse will be that we talked about Quetzalcoatl, and so that's something flying that counts as an aerial war game. So we didn't stray too far from the Lead Pursuit podcast intent. But more importantly, we really want to talk to you and Chris about just the game design and the process that you guys had gone through, and I think we've done a lot of that tonight. Probably we'll have to talk to you again as more factions come out and the game expands some more. But Nelson, are there any last parting shots you want to kind of leave us with? Any thoughts about the system or y'all's intent behind the series of releases?
No, I think just look out for the stuff that's coming out. And look, we love people's ideas. I mean, this is a community company, really. It's literally a bunch of gamers in a room, as many as we can fit in a room now per New Jersey, rules and regulations on COVID.
Exactly.
But send us, there's all kinds of, you can go to our Facebook page for Mythic Americas. You can go to the Mythico Studios Facebook page, and just get involved in the community and keep up with us. We do play other stuff. We do play Blood Red Skies and Black Seas and Cruel Seas and Bolt Action, and so if you visit Mythico Studios on Facebook, you'll see a huge community of like-minded folks, and maybe the next time you have us on, I can ask you. You can give us some advice on how to play my American Force and Blood Red Skies, because I'm not very good at the game right now.
Don't worry, neither am I with Americans. I think all of us that play Americans accuse Andy Chambers of stacking the deck for the British.
I have a firm suspicion that is indeed the case, but I haven't been able to prove that.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm definitely looking forward to checking out this Mythico Studios. I'm right across the Delaware River there in Pennsylvania. So I'm definitely looking forward to checking this place out. And actually, John Russell was telling me a little bit about it. So it sounds like a great place just to get together and game, and looking forward to getting over there and checking it out.
Oh, that'd be great, dude. Just let me know. Shoot me an email or call me or whatever. I'd love to have you over, man. That'd be great.
Chris, any last-minute thoughts from your end as the project lead?
No, I think we've covered everything pretty clearly. I was going to say the same thing. Steve, if you're going to head over to the club, let us know, and we'll make a day out of it. And I guess the one thing I did want to add is there is a Discord for Warlords that Mythic Americas now has a channel on. I monitor that pretty closely, so if people have ideas, that's a great place to put them if you're
good.
Not doing the Facebook thing.
Good, because you're better than I am. We have a Gathering of Eagles server, and we have our Lead Pursuit one, and I don't monitor either of them very well. I'm like, oh, look, someone asked a question a week ago. Maybe I should have been paying attention to so much playtest. Well, no, guys, it was really awesome to have you guys on. Thanks for coming on and discussing Mythic Americas, discussing the Mythicos game and Mythicos Studios kind of theories and what you guys are doing there. And we're really looking forward to getting our hands on the game when it comes out, seeing how the miniatures look, and then how the game rules play. So thanks very much for joining us tonight. And Steve, it was awesome to have you on. Welcome to your first full-fledged event as a Lead Pursuit native now.
Yeah, it's really exciting. It's great. You hit the
pay's
50
great. Pay and the benefits are awesome, aren't they?
No, it really sucks. I hear these things start going downhill at episode 51, and now you just brought me on so you can blame
exactly.
it on me. It's like a horrible
That's exactly
time
what
to
we're
join.
going to do. Most podcasts fail about this point. We're going to blame you, Steve. Now, it's good to have you on, brother. I'm glad that you've joined the team, and we'll talk about some of the other new team members in our next episode, which should all be talking on tactics.
Awesome. Guys, thanks for having us on. It was a fantastic time.
Yep, really appreciate it. Thank you.